Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome to the very first episode of Raise the Vibe. This is my new podcast, and I am very excited to be sharing this with you, and I really hope it resonates and you take something away from it. This is a space for women like you and some men who may find this topic interesting, but it's mostly for women who are ready to gently take personal accountability in order to build deeper self-awareness and to finally start shifting those patterns that have kept you feeling so stuck in life. But what we're doing here is different. We are not doing harsh self-criticism, we are not doing toxic positivity, and we are definitely not shaming ourselves into healing. Instead, we're approaching this work with softness, with compassion, with honesty, and with truth. And I really want to create a safe space where you can start exploring the beliefs, the patterns, and the emotional wiring that might have been holding you back from the love, peace, and alignment that I know you deeply deserve. So let me share a little bit of what you can expect here, because I really want you to feel supported as you come on this journey with me. Every week, I'm going to have honest, very real, and often very vulnerable conversations, which will focus on the inner world that creates our outer experiences, especially when it comes to dating and relationships. We'll explore things like how your subconscious beliefs shape who you're attracted to and who you attract, the patterns that you might be repeating without even realizing it, how your insecurity can keep you stuck in a low vibration, causing self-doubt and sabotage, how self-abandonment, overthinking, and having loose boundaries can keep you stuck in unhealthy patterns, how your nervous system plays such a powerful role in love, attachment, and even in who feels safe to you. We'll also talk about feminine energy, embodiment, and what true self-worth actually looks like, not just as a concept, but as something you truly feel and live. And most importantly, we are going to delve deep into personal accountability, because that is the deepest act of self-love that you can give yourself. This work is not about blaming yourself for where you are. It's not about beating yourself up for the choices that you made or the relationships you stayed in. It's not even about the things you didn't know at the time. It's about shining a gentle light and starting to look at some of the things that we've been too afraid to look at. Because when you have the courage to do that with love, with safety, with support, that's when you start to shift into a higher alignment. Now, because this podcast was born directly out of my own experiences, I want to share a little bit of my story with you. Because I've been there. I've lived these cycles over and over repeatedly. For years, I found myself in relationship patterns that always left me feeling anxious, unworthy, confused, and honestly, really drained. It took me a really long time to realize this, but I learned that some of the reasons I found myself in these similar situations is because I would either often attract the same type of men who were emotionally unavailable, and in some cases borderline narcissistic, or I would repeat similar patterns of behavior that were stemming from my own insecurity, self-doubt, and whatever unhealed wounds I had at the time. Now, before I continue this story, I really want to make one thing clear about what this podcast is absolutely not. It is absolutely not in any way, shape, or form talking negatively about men. It's not about sitting around complaining and bashing men. It's not about addressing narcissism or emotional abuse and manipulation as a way to blame others. Yes, I may mention these themes in my personal stories because unfortunately I have experienced them, but it's never to shame or blame anyone. I have consciously put in a lot of effort in trying to stay away from having a victim's mentality, because if I'm being honest, I did have that mentality for a really long time, and that is exactly what I'm trying to change here with this podcast. That being said, let's continue my story. So, I would often, not always, but more often than not, I'd find myself in relationship dynamics which started off with a lot of love bombing. The other person would intensely give me a lot of attention, praise, and validation. And if I'm being honest, I may have also unintentionally love bombed them back, because you give what you get, right? So that triggered really powerful feelings of connection and excitement. Then once I became emotionally invested, the dynamic would shift and the other person would become distant, critical, and emotionally unavailable. Looking back now, I can fully own that I had a part to play in this dynamic. It wasn't always just the other person. I too had my own unhealthy patterns of behavior that contributed to the emotional detachment. And these behaviors were rooted in insecurity, unhealed wounds, and being subconsciously drawn to these familiar dynamics, which felt normal to my nervous system, even when they weren't healthy. In one of my previous dating experiences, I had connected with someone online. It was long distance, and in the beginning, it felt amazing. The chemistry was instant, the conversations were deep. We talked for hours. He said all the right things, and it felt like we really saw each other. The connection escalated quickly. Trips were planned, talks of the future were discussed. It really felt like a strong emotional connection was being cultivated, and I was swept up in all of it. But soon after, that beautiful connection started to shift. What felt like consistency instantly turned into confusion. The emotional intensity faded, communication suddenly became unpredictable. And it ended up being one of the most painful experiences I have had in all of my years of dating. And the reason that it was so painful was because it was truly forcing me to take a deep look at parts of myself that I never truly wanted to acknowledge. That experience really forced me to confront my unmet needs, insecurities, and childhood wounds that I had tried to protect myself from for many years. If anyone has ever faced having to look that closely at themselves, you would know how confronting it is. Acknowledging beliefs rooted in unworthiness, emotional deprivation, and abandonment issues is so extremely painful. And this is exactly why many people don't want to do inner work. This is why personal accountability can feel so challenging. Because confronting those deep-seated issues is so painful at times that you honestly feel like dying inside. And so, for many people, it's much easier to stay in a victim's mentality and blame the other person for why things didn't work out. Shifting blame is easier than sitting with yourself and taking accountability for your own core beliefs. Now, I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying that in your situation and experiences that you are solely responsible for why your relationships didn't work out. Because as the saying goes, in most cases, not all, but most, it takes two to tango. The person I was dealing with was not innocent. He made his mistakes too, he made his choices, and he had his own issues. However, one of the biggest lessons I have learned from that experience is you are not responsible for someone else's accountability. Each person is responsible for their own actions, their own choices, their own growth. And if someone refuses to take accountability for something they did to hurt you, then they are consciously choosing to say no to an opportunity to grow. And that doesn't automatically make them a horrible person. It simply means that they're not ready for their own growth journey to begin just yet. Growth requires readiness. You cannot force someone into growth if they are not aligned with it internally. It's not about willpower alone. It's about timing. It's about willingness, self-awareness, and sometimes it's even about life circumstances lining up. And when someone isn't in that place of alignment, trying to push them there can actually backfire. Instead, acceptance, not acceptance of their behavior, but acceptance of where they are on their own journey, allows you to protect your own peace while respecting their process. But most people don't understand this, and so they find themselves stuck in a victim's mindset, where they keep repeating the same painful patterns because they're not doing the inner work. They're not taking accountability for their own issues, for their own beliefs. They're not even taking accountability for their own side in that dynamic. But you cannot punish someone for not being ready to take accountability. Because the truth is, these beliefs are not conscious. They are running quietly in the background, like a script that we don't even realize we're following. So the other person might not even be aware of what they're doing. And it is natural for us to become instantly defensive when someone tells us that we've done something to make them feel in a negative way. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone because, unfortunately, the reality is there are definitely narcissists and emotional manipulators out in the world, but not everyone is a narcissist. And not everyone is an emotional manipulator. Some people's actions and behaviors may seem manipulative, but in a lot of cases, people aren't intentionally trying to manipulate. Instead, they're acting from a place of survival and trying to protect themselves while searching for understanding. And we don't become aware of these beliefs until someone comes along and mirrors those parts of ourselves and triggers those inner wounds. And the funny thing is, we've probably met many people over the years who have triggered those parts, but we never fully acknowledged it because we simply weren't ready. We weren't aligned yet to actually face ourselves and accept the journey of personal growth. And unless we bring these core beliefs and patterns into our awareness, we just keep reliving them over and over. Different faces, same dynamics. This is why I talk so much about core beliefs, because they shape everything. A core belief is simply a story that your mind and nervous system have learnt to tell you in order to feel safe. Even if that story no longer serves you, even if it's actually keeping you stuck and hurting you today. Now, I want to go a little bit deeper here because this was a huge part of my own healing journey. At the root of many core beliefs are what's called schemas. Schemas are deeply ingrained emotional patterns that we develop very early in life, usually in childhood, based on how our emotional needs were or weren't met. They shape how we feel about ourselves, how we connect with others, and how we experience relationships. In my case, I developed several core schemas that were quietly influencing my relationships, and these are defectiveness and shame, which is the deep, painful belief that something is wrong or unlovable about me. Then there's emotional deprivation, which is the fear that my emotional needs will never be fully met or that no one will truly nurture and care for me. Then we have abandonment, the constant fear that people will leave or withdraw emotionally. And finally, instability, the belief that love is unpredictable, fragile, and can be taken away at any moment. These schemas were not conscious choices. They were survival mechanisms that I learned through childhood during times when my emotional world didn't always feel safe, stable, or fully supported. And over time, those unhealed schemas carried into my adult relationships. When I think back to my most recent dating experience, I can now clearly see how all of this was playing out beneath the surface. In the beginning, the connection was powerful. It felt like I was finally being seen. And for someone with emotional deprivation and abandonment schema, that kind of intensity feels like safety, at least in the beginning. It was fast, intense, deeply emotional. Future plans, long conversations, instant chemistry, and very quickly I became emotionally attached. Once that attachment was formed, and once my nervous system felt invested, that's when all of my core beliefs started to show up. I became hypervigilant. I started scanning for signs of instability and rejection. I started questioning things that felt off, and I found myself constantly seeking and needing reassurance. If he didn't answer a call right away, my mind would spiral. Why isn't he responding? Is he pulling away? Did I do or say something wrong? Is this the beginning of the end? I started asking him more and more questions. I needed that reassurance. I needed confirmation that we were okay, because at that point, my abandonment schema was fully activated. This is where personal accountability becomes so important. I didn't realize this at the time, but looking back, I now see that the more hypervigilant I became, the more anxious I felt. And the more anxious I felt, the more I triggered his inner wounds and his own patterns of emotional withdrawal, inconsistency, and avoidant tendencies. And before we knew it, we were in a cycle of triggering each other's wounds. And I found myself bouncing between having a victim's mentality to wanting to take accountability. I hated the dynamic we were in, and I hated being the cause of his emotional distress. So I wanted to take accountability for anything that I did to hurt him. But at the same time, I wanted desperately for him to take accountability for the things he was doing to hurt me. And when he couldn't give me that in return, I found myself flipping back to the victim mentality. The dynamic changed from two people really caring about each other, to two people struggling for power. And when you're trapped in a power struggle, growth is just not possible. Through this experience, I came to understand something really important about emotional growth. Not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been in these kinds of dynamics. And that is, healing is not something you can force in someone else. You can want to help heal someone. You may even see their potential to grow. You can recognize where they're stuck, but none of that matters unless they are ready to face themselves. And the painful truth is, you cannot love someone into their healing. You cannot give enough. You cannot fix enough. You cannot sacrifice enough to make someone ready if they aren't willing or able to do the work. That was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn, because I believed for a long time that if I could just be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, they would eventually meet me there, that somehow my love could soften their wounds. But healing doesn't work that way. At some point, I had to accept that their growth was not my responsibility to carry. My only responsibility was to return to myself, to take ownership of my healing, to finally stop outsourcing my worth to people who were not equipped or willing to meet me in the emotional space I deeply desired. And while that was painful, it was also incredibly freeing, because I don't have to wait for someone else to choose growth in order for me to grow. And that's exactly what I did. I reached a point where I realized I had to fully remove myself from this dynamic. I had to choose myself. I had to acknowledge that if I truly wanted to be successful in my own growth, I needed to isolate myself for a period of time and take a break from dating. I needed to shift my energy inward, to focus on my health, to work on the parts of me that still carried insecurities, like my body, my weight, my self-image. Not from a place of shame, but from a place of self-love and empowerment. I began making my healing about me again, and I started engaging in activities that felt spiritually aligned. I focused on doing things that grounded me and brought me back into my body and into my present moment. Grounding has become one of the most important tools in my healing, because when you're grounded, you're no longer operating from survival mode. You're not being pulled and tossed around by your emotions or triggers. You're anchored, you're steady. There are many different variations when it comes to grounding. It's not just about meditating and saying positive affirmations. For me, grounding looks like this: taking long walks, spending time near water, moving my body through exercise, journaling my thoughts and feelings, limiting input of social media, surrounding myself with people that feel safe, supportive, and aligned. And my favorite, making time for hobbies and creativity that light me up. Grounding is what allows me to regulate my nervous system so that when painful things happen, I don't immediately spiral into emotional chaos like I once did before. A recent example of this is when the person I was involved with told me he had met someone else, someone he wanted to give his energy to, and someone he wanted to be with. Now, as you can imagine, hearing that was deeply painful and it hurt a lot. But because I've done the inner work, I was able to respond rather than react. Instead of falling apart, instead of lashing out, instead of trying to convince him or hold on to something that no longer served me, I simply told him, I just want you to be happy. This response didn't come from performance or pretending. It came from genuine grounding, from knowing that I can feel pain without needing to create more pain, from knowing that his journey is not mine to control, and from trusting that what is meant for me will never require me to sacrifice my emotional well-being. That's the difference between reacting and responding. When you're able to respond rather than react, you know you are grounded. You know you have grown. And that, for me, has been one of the most powerful indicators of how far I have come. Another powerful tool that has helped me shift more into alignment is learning how to self-source love. What does it mean to self-source love? It means that instead of outsourcing your sense of worth, safety, and happiness to another person, you become your own source of love, security, and validation. For most of my life, I was constantly looking outside of myself for someone to make me feel secure. I thought that if I just found the right person, if I was loved enough, if someone finally saw my worth, then I would feel complete. But that's not how it works. True self-worth is not dependent on whether someone else chooses you. It's not built on someone else's attention, consistency, or commitment. It's built internally by learning how to meet your own emotional needs, by learning how to sit with yourself in your pain, by learning how to self-soothe when your nervous system is activated, by becoming the stable, loving parent that your inner child has always craved. For me, self-sourcing love looks like this. It's learning how to be present with my emotions without spiraling. It's learning how to comfort myself through reflective journaling and creative projects. It's allowing myself to feel disappointment or sadness without immediately attaching a story of unworthiness to those feelings. It's no longer begging for breadcrumbs or trying to prove my value to anyone. It's standing in my truth and saying, even if you choose not to love me, I still love myself. Self-sourcing love is not about becoming emotionally unavailable to others. It doesn't mean that you no longer desire partnership. It doesn't mean that you don't want connection. It just means that your sense of stability is no longer dependent on whether someone else shows up. And when you get to that place, when you become your own source of emotional safety, that's when everything begins to shift. Because you're no longer chasing love. You're embodying it. If I'm being completely honest with you though, there were moments I didn't even want to let go. There were moments where staying attached to the illusion felt safer than grieving the truth. Because letting go means grieving. It means facing the heartbreak, the loneliness, the dreams you built in your mind that now won't come true. It means grieving not just the person, but the version of yourself you thought you were going to become with that person. Sometimes we hold on longer than we should, not because we're weak, but because letting go feels like death to the nervous system. It felt safer to stay attached to the hope that one day he would wake up and see me the way I wanted him to, that he would realize my worth, that the connection we shared would eventually bring us back together in some better, healthier version. But the truth is, I was holding on to a fantasy, not reality. This is why I feel so deeply called to share this work, because I see so many women today who are repeating the same painful patterns. Yes, there are narcissistic men, there are emotionally manipulative people, absolutely. But we need to have an honest conversation with ourselves as women. Because if we don't do the inner healing, if we don't learn to take accountability for the wounds we carry, then we will continue attracting these same dynamics over and over again. This can apply to men as well, but I'm directly speaking to women because that's just my personal experience. I haven't lived life as a man, and I do recognize that men and women face different challenges and experience different realities. And as much as I hate to admit it, the truth is that many of us as women have developed a habit of sitting around and complaining about men, bashing men, blaming men. And what we're really doing is avoiding the work we need to do inside of ourselves. What I see happening today is that women are not just rejecting toxic men, they are rejecting men altogether. We're creating a culture where men are not valued, where women are not valued, where both genders are teaching the younger generation that if someone doesn't align with you, you get to devalue them, you dismiss them, you cancel them. And this is why we see so much self-regulation issues in today's younger generation, because they are growing up watching adults who don't know how to emotionally regulate themselves, who don't know how to take accountability, and who don't know how to model healthy love. This is why Raise the Vibe exists. It's not just about dating, it's about creating high value, high vibrational women who can pass on healthier patterns to the generations that come after us. A high vibrational woman is not perfect. She's not always calm, she's not emotionless, she's not cold. A high vibrational woman knows how to sit with her emotions. She knows how to observe her triggers. She knows how to respond instead of react. A high vibrational woman knows how to communicate with love and with boundaries. She knows how to protect her peace without shutting down her heart. She embodies self-worth, Not because everything in life is perfect, but because she's rooted in self-trust. She doesn't need to control anyone else. She doesn't need to chase or beg or force anyone to see her value. Her value is non-negotiable to herself. And that's who I'm speaking to with this podcast. That's who I want you to become. And that's exactly who you are becoming by simply being here, showing up for this work, and choosing yourself. If anything I've shared today resonates with you, if you even feel a tiny part of yourself in this story, I want you to know that you are not alone. And I would absolutely love for you to subscribe to this podcast, share it with a friend who may need to hear it, and join me each week as we go deeper into this healing journey together. Because you don't have to do this alone. I am here walking this path right alongside you. And as we close today's first episode, I want to leave you with this gentle reminder. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not behind. You are learning to release what no longer serves you. You are safe. You are worthy. And you are ready to raise your vibe. Thank you so much for being here. I'll catch you in the next episode.